Think about the last person who disappointed you. Really think about them. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Did they actually change? Or did you just finally see them? Because here's what nobody tells you about disappointment. It's rarely about the other person doing something wrong. Most of the time, it's about you discovering that the person in front of you never matched the one you built inside your head. The real betrayal wasn't theirs. It was the story you told yourself about who they were. And before you close this video thinking this is about toxic relationships or red flags, it's not. It's not about bad people. It's not about choosing wrong. It's about something quieter, something almost invisible, that Carl Jung spent decades trying to explain to a world that really didn't want to hear it. You don't fall in love with people. You fall in love with ideas. And until you learn to tell the difference, every relationship, romantic, platonic, professional, will follow the exact same script. High hopes, small cracks, quiet devastation. This video is about breaking that script, not with toxic positivity, not with love yourself first advice that sounds good on a poster and does nothing on a Tuesday night, but with 5 actual psychological steps grounded in Jungian theory and modern personality research that will permanently change how you see the people around you. We're going to cover projection, idealization, the shadow, the moment of clarity, and finally, the step most people never reach, the one I'm going to say for last because it's the one that actually changes everything. Don't skip ahead. It won't make sense without the ones before it. All right, here's what's actually going on. Jung had this idea that humans are fundamentally terrible witnesses to their own inner world. Not because we're stupid, we're not, but because the mind has a very inconvenient design flaw. It doesn't just perceive reality, it projects onto it, like a film projector running constantly, throwing images from the inside out, painting the world around you with everything you believe, fear, desire, and refuse to acknowledge about yourself. This is what Jung called projection, and it's not a quirk. It's not something only emotionally immature people do. It's a baseline feature of human psychology. You do it, I do it, the most self-aware person you know does it, just slightly less frequently and with slightly more embarrassment afterward. Here's how it works in practice. You meet someone. In the first few minutes, sometimes seconds, your brain starts filling in the gaps. You notice the way they laugh, the books on their shelf, the fact that they remembered your coffee order. And your brain, that enthusiastic and slightly irresponsible storyteller, takes those fragments and builds a complete person. A person who is, conveniently, exactly what you needed them to be. A 2013 study from the University of Waterloo found that people form stable impressions of others within the first few interactions, and then actively filter incoming information to confirm those impressions rather than update them. Your brain doesn't want new data. It wants to be right. So it takes the person standing in front of you and gently, invisibly replaces them with the character it already cast in that role. Which means the version of someone you fall for in the first weeks of a friendship, a romance, a work relationship is almost never them. It's you. Your best hopes, your unmet needs, your blueprint of what a person like this should be. You built them. You populated them with qualities you wanted to find. And then you called it connection. Before we get into the 5 steps, drop a comment below. Think of a relationship where this happened to you. When did you realize the person you thought you knew was partly a version you invented? I'm genuinely curious, and I think you'll be surprised how many people in the comments had the exact same experience. Now, the reason this matters, the reason Jung thought it was one of the most important things a person could understand about themselves, is that you cannot genuinely connect with someone you've replaced with a fantasy. You can love the idea, you can be deeply, sincerely attached to it, but you're alone in that attachment. Because the actual person, with their contradictions, their limitations, their very human mess, is standing slightly to the left of the character you created, waiting to be seen. So how do you stop? How do you actually learn to see people as they are, instead of as you need them to be? That's what the 5 steps are for. 1. The projection audit. Nobody likes to hear that they project. It sounds like an accusation. Like you're being told your feelings aren't real, or that the people you love don't deserve the love. That's not what it means. Projection doesn't make your emotions fake. It makes them misdirected. And the first step to seeing people clearly is learning to catch yourself in the act. The projection audit is simple, but genuinely uncomfortable. Every time you have a strong emotional reaction to someone, admiration that feels almost too intense, disappointment that hits harder than it should, irritation that seems out of proportion to what they actually did, pause. Not for long, just long enough to ask one question. Is this about them, or is this about something I needed them to be? Strong positive reactions are just as suspicious as negative ones. If you meet someone and within 2 weeks they're the most interesting person you've ever encountered, that's worth examining. Not to dismiss the connection, but to ask, which parts of this are real observation and which parts are projection? Jung wrote extensively about what he called the hooks, qualities in the other person that your projection actually attaches to. The projection isn't random. It latches onto something real, but it amplifies it, distorts it, turns a quality into a symbol. Someone is kind, and your projection turns them into a savior. Someone is confident, and you turn them into a hero. The hook is real. The costume you put on them is yours. The practical application is this. Start keeping what some therapists call an expectation journal. Not elaborate. 3 sentences is enough. After any significant interaction with someone important to you, write down what you expected from them going in, what actually happened, and where the gap was. Do this for 2 weeks. The patterns will be illuminating and slightly mortifying. And that brings us to something that most people completely overlook: the difference between who someone is and who they're capable of becoming. Because here's where idealization gets really sneaky. 2. The potential trap. You're not always idealizing who someone is right now. Sometimes, and this is the more sophisticated and more dangerous version, you're in love with who they could be, who they would be, if only. If only they tried harder, if only they healed that thing, if only they saw what you see in them. This is what psychologists call potential-based attachment, and it is one of the most effective ways to stay stuck in a relationship that isn't actually working, because potential is unfalsifiable. Every time the real person shows up, flawed, inconsistent, human, you have a ready explanation. They haven't gotten there yet. You just need to be patient. You just need to believe in them a little harder. The research on this is interesting. A series of studies on idealization in romantic relationships, including work by Sandra Murray at the University of Buffalo, found that a certain degree of positive illusion in early relationships is actually healthy. Seeing your partner in a slightly better light than objective observers do correlates with relationship satisfaction and longevity. So idealization, in small doses, is not pathological. It's human. The problem is scale. When the gap between who you see and who they actually are becomes too large, when you're maintaining an image that requires ignoring significant, consistent evidence to the contrary, you're no longer in a relationship with a person. You're in a relationship with your own hope. And hope, unlike people, never disappoints you, never leaves dishes in the sink, never has a bad day and says something unkind. The practical move here is what I call the 90-day reality test. Not to be clinical about relationships, but to deliberately notice over 3 months not what someone says about who they are, but what they consistently do. Patterns at 90 days are almost always more accurate than impressions at 10 days. Talk is a sample size of 1. Behavior is data. Now, if you've tried this and found yourself explaining away the patterns, that's not really who they are. They've just been stressed. That's the next step. 3. The defense attorney problem. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you hired a lawyer to defend someone you love. Not a fair lawyer, a defense attorney. Their entire job is to explain away every piece of evidence against their client. Every inconsistency gets an excuse,
Every red flag gets a context, every broken promise gets extenuating circumstances. Now imagine that lawyer lives in your head, full-time, working exclusively on behalf of the people you've decided to care about. That's idealization as a defense mechanism.
And it is extraordinarily good at its job. Jung called the part of the psyche that maintains these comfortable illusions the persona. Not just the social mask we wear, but the narrative we construct about the world and the people in it to make everything feel safe and coherent. Dismantling that narrative isn't pleasant. It feels like losing something, because you are losing something, the comfortable version of reality you've been living in. The cognitive mechanism here is called motivated reasoning, and it's been studied extensively. When we're emotionally invested in a conclusion, we evaluate evidence not to find truth, but to justify what we already believe. Jonathan Haidt at NYU described it as being a lawyer, not a scientist, starting with the verdict and working backward to find supporting evidence. The antidote is deliberate perspective reversal. Specifically, take the most charitable interpretation you have of someone's behavior and then actively construct the least charitable one. Not to be cynical, but to make sure you're actually considering the full picture. If the uncharitable interpretation is implausible, great, you've tested your view. If it's just as plausible as the charitable one, that's information. That's something worth knowing. Which of these 3 steps have you recognized in yourself so far? Drop it in the comments. Step 1, 2, or 3. I want to see which one lands hardest for people. 4. The discomfort of accuracy. Here's a thing nobody prepares you for. Seeing people clearly doesn't feel like clarity. Not at first. It feels like disappointment. Like something has been taken from you. Like the world got slightly smaller and slightly less magical. And that discomfort, that specific grief of updated perception, is one of the main reasons people don't do it. The idealized version felt better. It was warmer. It had better lighting. What you're experiencing in those moments is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance resolution, the process of updating your internal model to match incoming evidence. It's uncomfortable because your brain treats its own beliefs as real objects, and changing them feels like loss, which is why most people unconsciously choose to protect the belief and dismiss the evidence. Epictetus wrote something that Jung would have appreciated. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. He wrote that in the 1st century. People have been struggling with this exact thing for a very long time. The practical step here is to practice what therapists call descriptive observation, training yourself to describe people's behavior without immediately interpreting it. Not, she doesn't care about me, but she canceled plans 3 times this month. Not, he's controlling, but he made decisions about our plans without asking me. The interpretation is the projection. The description is the data. When you stay in description long enough, the interpretation that eventually forms is usually more accurate and more fair than the one your anxious brain would have produced in the first 10 seconds. This step feels slow. It feels overly analytical for something as human as relationships, but it's actually an act of respect toward the other person, who deserves to be seen as they are, and toward yourself, who deserves to be in relationships with real people instead of curated projections. And now, the step I told you about at the beginning, the one that changes everything. Stay with me. 5. The mirror turn. Everything we've talked about so far has been about them, about seeing the other person more accurately, about dismantling the projections, testing the patterns, resisting the motivated reasoning. All of that is necessary. None of it is the hardest part. The hardest part is this: understanding why you needed the idealized version in the first place. Because projection, real, deep, persistent idealization, is never random. It's not a glitch. It's a signal. The qualities you project onto other people, the ones you amplify beyond recognition, the ones you grieve when reality finally clarifies, those qualities are almost always things you haven't been able to give yourself, qualities you believe you don't have, needs you haven't known how to meet. Jung called this the shadow, the collection of everything we've disowned about ourselves,
everything we decided wasn't acceptable or lovable or safe to be. And here's the quietly devastating mechanism. What we exile from our own self-image, we desperately seek in others. The person who can't let themselves be vulnerable idealizes people who seem effortlessly open. The person who suppressed their ambition falls for someone driven, brilliant, larger than life. The person who was never allowed to be angry is magnetically drawn to someone who doesn't care what anyone thinks. You don't just love an idea, you love a mirror. A mirror showing you the parts of yourself you never gave permission to exist. There is a study, often cited in trauma-informed therapy circles, from the work of John Bowlby on attachment theory, later extended by researchers including Mary Main, showing that our earliest attachment patterns become internal working models, blueprints for how relationships work, what we deserve, what safety looks like. We don't choose the people we idealize at random. We choose them with exquisite unconscious precision, based on a blueprint written before we had words.
Understanding this doesn't make the idealization disappear, but it does something more useful. It gives it an address. Instead of, why do I keep falling for people who disappoint me? The question becomes, what is it in me that this person was supposed to heal?
That question is harder. It's also the only one worth answering. Here's what this looks like in practice. Think of the last person you truly idealized. Someone who, at their peak in your imagination, felt almost too good, too necessary, too perfectly placed. Now ask, what specific quality of theirs lit you up most? What did they represent? Not who they were, what they represented to you. Freedom, stability, validation, creativity, passion. Whatever it was, that quality is a compass. It's pointing at something in you that wants to exist. This isn't navel-gazing for its own sake. It's the difference between spending the next decade unconsciously recreating the same dynamic with different people, or actually understanding the pattern well enough to change it. Jung put it plainly, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That's the step nobody wants to take. Because it's so much easier to be disappointed in other people than to be curious about yourself. There's a specific kind of person who makes it all the way to step 5 and actually does the work. They don't become cynical. They don't become cold. They don't swear off deep feeling or protect themselves with irony and distance. They become, slowly, imperfectly, genuinely, capable of something that was actually impossible before. Real connection. Not with the idea of a person, with the person. And here's what that looks like from the inside. It's quieter than infatuation. It doesn't have that electric, vertiginous quality of falling for a projection. It's more like arriving somewhere, seeing someone, their actual edges, their boring habits, their inexplicable opinions about things that don't matter, and choosing them anyway. Not despite seeing clearly, because of it. That's not less than idealization. It's more, because it's real. Because it requires 2 actual people instead of one person and their own imagination. The most courageous thing you might do this week isn't dramatic. It's this. Pick one person in your life you know you've idealized, and ask yourself one honest question about who they actually are, without immediately defending the answer. You don't have to see everyone perfectly. You just have to start closing the gap between the story and the person. One uncomfortable, respectful, genuine observation at a time. If any of this made you pause, if something in here was a little too accurate for comfort, you know what to do. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of thing. No pressure, but the next video is going to be equally uncomfortable. Fair warning.